Thank you very much for joining us right here on the India Development Debate on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath. Now come tomorrow, the Modi government, headed by the Prime Minister himself, will be completing 4 years in office, and with just 1 year to go for a fresh mandate, it's time for some serious introspection. Looking back, it is a mixed bag as far as the state of the economy is concerned. Inflation is under control, growth is picking up, forex reserves are at an all-time high, and ease of doing business has improved a lot from the 2014 levels. And going forward, high fuel prices threaten to derail the growth story, even as the lack of a pickup in private investment points to a weak demand scenario. On the flip side, Modi, who came to power with a promise to create 10 million new jobs every year, may have failed to deliver on his promise, while the agri distress continues to remain the biggest sore point. Add to that the crisis in the banking sector. Looks like there are more misses than hits right now for Team Modi. As the government completes 4 years in office, ET Now does a dipstick check on the state of the economy on this very special edition of the India Development Debate tonight. And it is indeed my pleasure to welcome R. Jagannathan, Editorial Director, Swarajya Magazine, Sadanand Dhume, Fellow American Enterprise Institute, Yogendra Yadav, Sheshadri Chari from the BJP, and Mohammad Khan from the Congress. Thank you, each one of you, for being with us. And I will begin with you, Jaggi. And I will request each one of you to keep your answers short. I've got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of hits, lots of misses, lots of ground to cover. So we'll just request each one of you to keep your answers brief so that there can be a lot of interjections, there can be a lot of counterpoints. No mudslinging on this show, so let's keep it simple. Let's not make it completely political so that nobody can hear anybody. Let's keep it simple and let's have a healthy discussion right here. So Jaggi, let's begin with you. He was voted to power because he promised to deliver Achhe Din. 48 months in office. Has Prime Minister Modi kept his word?
See, it all depends on how you interpret the words Achhe Din. Normally, in a common language discourse, it should mean more jobs and higher incomes. Has he delivered on that? No, that has not happened. I think the economy has been going through a painful process of 2 consecutive drought years. Then when you had a system where you had 2 systemic disruptions, one was demonetization, which need not have come, and GST, which had to come. Okay, so you had 2 consecutive back-to-back disruptions. So what you had is a slowdown in growth and a double balance sheet problem, where you had very bad loans and very bad balance sheets on both sides, banks and corporates. And so obviously the jobs have not grown. My guess is that at the current rate of employment elasticity of the economy, we are creating about 5 to 6 million jobs a year. We need to create 8 to 10 million, which was what the promise was. So we have fallen short of the promise, and that is certainly the problem. So in that sense, Achhe Din have not arrived. Maybe they'll arrive in the second term if he gets one.
Okay, so let's talk about the issues on hand first before we go across to getting a fresh mandate next year. Yogendra Yadav, if I may come to you, is this a case of an expectation mismatch? I mean, like Jaggi says, depends on how you look at it. He came to power with such towering promises that it was always perhaps going to be a very tall order. So is this a case of exuberance and expectation mismatch? And how will you judge the NDA government vis-a-vis the UPA?
I'm glad Jagannath said what he said, and I would continue in the same way. Look, let's not judge this government against its promises. Those promises were rather irresponsible, I'd be blunt. All that irresponsible talk of 15 lakh rupees in every account, the number of jobs which he didn't probably even count what he was promising, all kinds of weird promises. Let's stick more realistically to what his government could have done given what they inherited, what the overall climate was. I think we need to remember that while the government suffered droughts, which were not of its making, but it also suffered from a boon, namely low oil prices, which was just in nature's gift, historic gift. The government simply failed to work on this. On what the government specifically promised, not the strange electoral promises, but the more concrete ones. 1, doubling of farmers' income in 6 years. 4 years we've had so far, not out of those 6, but 4 years we've had. What have we achieved? 1.6%. Is that hitting towards doubling in 6 years? You take your guess. Housing, what was the promise? 1 crore new houses a year to be built by government. What has been delivered? I think about 16 lakhs. Drinking water, allocation has been cut down. Education, what was the promise? 6% of GDP. What has been delivered? Actually, educational provisions, budgetary provisions have been brought down. If these are the kind of things we are looking at, and I would not even begin to rake up the whole question of employment on which the government has tried to fudge the information. So to my mind, to sum up to begin with, given a otherwise very favorable circumstances other than those of drought, the government has actually failed to make use of that. In fact, given the experiment of demonetization, and I'm with Jagannath to say that let's not club GST and demonetization, they are two different kinds of exercises. A government that could undertake something like demonetization without consulting a serious economist, I mean, this is like using a plier to conduct an eye surgery. This is the kind of things that this government can do.
Yes.
So I'm afraid economy is too serious a matter to be left to this kind of a government.
Okay, fair point indeed. You've highlighted the hits and the misses, and I will go across to the politicians in just a bit. But before I do that, I'll go across to Sadanand Dhume. And Sadanand Dhume, do you believe that the government has done justice to its political capital? Yogi Yadav doesn't really think so, because Mr. Modi has moved tentatively on labour reforms and is now trying to sell Air India. What more could he have done?
Not by disagreeing slightly with Yogendra. I think it's perfectly fine for people to judge governments against their mandates. I think that if you come into office with the first single party majority in 30 years, you will be judged to a higher yardstick, and it is perfectly fair for you to be judged to a higher yardstick. I would not judge a party that comes into power with 180 seats the same way as I've judged one that comes into power with 282 on its own, and more with allies. So that's my first point. Secondly, that I would agree that if we're keeping this discussion at this point narrowly focused on the economy, I would have to say that yes, the government has been a disappointment. Has it some good things? Yes. I would say the bankruptcy code is a good thing. I would say that GST, despite the fact that it's deeply flawed, net on the whole, if we take the long view, will probably turn out to be a good thing. On the other hand, this government also has to take the blame for demonetization, which most serious people acknowledge is one of the stupidest things that any Indian government has done, if not in the last 70 years, certainly in the last 25 years. It's a completely harebrained decision. So, you know, they've done a few things. They've tried to move in the right direction on in a few places. They've had a massive miss with demonetization. They have not really moved seriously on land or labor, though to their credit, they did try to move on land early on, and then they were kind of beaten back by the Congress and Sood Poot Ki Sarkar and so on. So on the whole, I would say that the economic record has been disappointing. This is not to say they've done nothing. It's just that they've done a lot less than they should have.
Okay, given the political mandate that they perhaps have, but let me take this across to the Congress party before I go across to Mr. Sheshadri Chari, who represents the BJP, and Mohammad Khan, talking about specifics, whether it's the GST, whether it's the IBC, whether it's the JAM Trinity, and may I also say demonetization. I was never a fan, I never supported demonetization the way it was carried out, but you know, these were decisive, unconventional, bold steps to cleanse the Indian economy and to formalize the Indian economy, and the proof of the pudding is that yes, there are new IT return filers, yes, you know, it's a decadal high as far as the tax to the the personal income tax to the GDP is concerned. So won't this go down as an economic achievement? Are you not going to grant the government this?
Bold and decisive measures, those are the words you use to describe them rather charitably. And I am tempted to quote one of their august leaders, Mr. Arun Shuri, in the face of demonetization, and someone said, my God, what a bold decision, Mr. Shuri, surely you stand with your government on this. And he said, jumping into the well is also a bold decision. That doesn't mean one necessarily advocates it. But facetiousness aside, I want to talk to you about three specific things. Let's start with the fundamentals, Supriya. This government, it is no secret, has tinkered or changed the way we calculate our GDP. There has been a lot written about it, but given the paucity of time, I will simply suffice to say that it means the government delivers lower growth despite having altered the formula. So
My
even despite them changing the base year to try and give better results, they still fell short of the halfway mark.
Muhammad Khan.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Muhammad Khan, my specific,
Go ahead,
Muhammad
Sophia.
Khan, 1 second. My specific question is, my specific question is that there are efforts that have been made to formalize the economy, to financialize the economy, and there have been some results achieved there. Will you not cut them slack on this count?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think Mr. Yadav put it well when he said you don't conduct eye surgery with pliers. Again, every effort that they've made has been a knee-jerk reaction based on a poor understanding of the challenges our country faces and on an even worse understanding of basic economics. This is a subject on which we can go on at length, and in fact we have on different occasions. Demonetization, hasty implementation of GST, the tax terrorism angle, which I love to talk about. A government which came in on the promise that they would eliminate tax terrorism, a manifesto promise, and they are running the biggest tax terrorism regime in liberal India that has ever been seen since Narasimha Rao's government. This is a government that taxes you on everything. Krishi Kalyan says, education says, Swachh Bharat says. If you earn above 50 lakh rupees, you pay additional income tax in addition to the higher slab. 23,000 millionaires have left the country. There has been a marked increase in NPAs, as they like to put it, not because of the Congress, but because of the fact that they have created an environment which is hostile to entrepreneurship taking hold. Yes, a few independent individuals like, well, it's not important to name them, but a few individuals have certainly profiteered of this government. But the truth is that this government's entire policy, and what do they say when you ask them about entrepreneurship? They throw mudra in your face, to which we reply, if mudra is creating the kind of jobs that you say it is, wouldn't that be captured in your own fudged GDP figures? There's a lot to say on this, Supriya ji, but I'm assuming you want me to keep this short as the opening statement.
Right. Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you for keeping it short. I'm going to take this across to Mr. Chaudhary Chari. And Mr. Chari, you know, you've heard the panel broadly talk about the hits and the misses, but I really want to start talking about the macroeconomic stability. Many will say there is macroeconomic stability. You've resisted the temptation to go populist, but that was all aided by a huge tailwind that you had in crude. If the macroeconomic picture is concerned, things have improved in the last 4 years. But that picture is going to drastically change as oil prices go up, and your own government, at least in New Delhi, is grappling with the situation. It doesn't know what to do with crude. Will you concede, will you confess that your good run in the last 4 years has largely been on account of an extremely benign crude oil regime?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was only the factor of benign crude oil prices. And the crude oil prices have been fluctuating from all these years. And if you see the fluctuations in 2009, 2008, 2009, 2010, it has fluctuated to such an extent that the prices should have, the oil prices, petrol and diesel prices should have shot up to something like 130 plus, but it was kept low, and even that low was something like 61 rupees to 65 rupees because of the heavy subsidy. This government decided to work against the subsidies, as against the subsidies that were given by the earlier UPA government to the tune of 4.5 lakh crore. This government has given a subsidy of just 7,000 crore. So by reducing the subsidy, we have been able to correct the anomalies that were plaguing the financial sector. This financial correction was very much necessary. So now, of course, there are two factors that are affecting. It is not just the crude oil prices going up to $80 per barrel. It is also the rupee that is taking the hard hit because of the international market situation. And once the currency fluctuation stops, I think the crude oil prices will be stabilized. But in the meantime, we should also not forget that more than 47% of increase in forex reservation reserves will also come to the rescue. Therefore, there is a cause, it is a cause of worry, but this cause of worry will be tackled and this prices will be sustained. But there are other factors. The Badmer refinery, which has been promised and which work has begun, that will again add to almost 40,000 crore of foreign exchange reserves. So I think in general, after another 1.5 to 2 years, the situation will be much simpler and better. But of course, these issues will have to be surmounted, and the government is working on it. As far as the other sectors are concerned, I think the automobile sector growth is very good, textile sector growth is very good, Employment Provident Fund organization, if you have to believe them, the figures that they have put out, the last year's figures that they have put out is something like 39.36 lakhs jobs have been created, and out of 800.
Mr. Chari, I have a specific segment where I want to discuss jobs with you. Mr. Chari, I have a specific segment where I will discuss jobs with you, and I will do that in just a bit. I will come back to you in just a bit, but I'll take it across to Sadanand Dume. And Sadanand, the Moody's upgrade and the 30-point jump in the ease of doing business rankings and the trophy achievements of this government. But why have they not managed to substantially change sentiment on the ground? If ease of doing business is so good and the kind of jump that we did see, why is Indian industry not investing?
Yeah, I mean, I would divide that. I mean, I think in fairness to the government, they have been quite successful on the FDI front, and that is in part because they have changed sentiment, at least among foreign investors. But they have a much more serious problem, which is about domestic investor sentiment. And obviously, there are many reasons for this. There's the twin balance sheet problem and so on. But I think that, one thing that the Congress spokesperson brought up over here is something I agree with, which is that, in many ways, this government was, India was at a fork in the road in 2014. And I think that what this government decided was that they were going to double down on this idea of cloaking themselves in morality. And what that effectively meant was, in my view, over-empowering a fairly leaky tax department. And instead of going for wealth creation, instead of trying to create conditions that would lead to more job creation, they doubled down on this tax terrorism. I'd say they were even worse than UPA, and UPA was pretty bad in this department. And this has had a dampening effect on investors. So even if you go beyond the twin balance sheet problem, I think the fact that $23,000 millionaires have had to leave India, look at the amount of potential investment over there, look at the number of potential jobs over there. This is kind of crazy, right? Because if you look around the developed world, countries actually bend over backwards to try and attract these kinds of people. And under the Modi government, India has actually driven them away. So I would say that this is kind of, goes back to how people think about wealth. And I think that over here, some of the old style thinking of the RSS, some of the old style thinking of the BJP has in fact harmed the economy.
Okay, that's a very valid and perhaps an interesting argument that you're bringing to the table. I will get Mr. Chari to respond to that in just a bit, but I'll take a quick question to Yogendra Yadav as well. And Mr. Yadav, we've waited for 4 years for the revival of private investment cycle, and it really hasn't happened. And all of us know that without that virtuous cycle of private investment taking off, we are not going to see a big pickup in growth. Where will the jobs come from if there is no investment? Where will economic activity come from if there is no investment? Are you going to blame it all on the twin balance sheet problems? Are you going to completely blame it all on the NPA mess? Or do you believe that there is some amount of truth in what Sadanand is saying, that, this government was perhaps hit with the Soot Boot Ki Sarkar allegation, and they went too far ahead in the game than to project otherwise, and tax terror or over-empowering the taxman is perhaps one such instance, and which is why we are seeing sentiment not improve on the ground. Mr. Yadav?
I don't know if I'm entirely with that argument, but that's a larger argument about how countries' economy should be managed, and I don't know if this is the right occasion to get into that argument. On the limited question of this government's ability to attract investment of various kinds, and I agree investment is critical. In addition to the factors that Sadanand has mentioned, please remember the investor also reads newspapers. They know what's happening in your country. They look at not merely what's happening in stock exchange, they also look at the wider picture. And may I suggest that the wider picture has not been very rosy, that that thanks to the manner in which this government has played out, especially questions of social divisions, questions of community relationships, India has just had such bad name. So that must have influenced the investors in some way or the other, though I am not an expert. I did want to pick a point with Mr. Chari before he responds on the crude oil issue. Look, it's not my case that petrol prices should be cheap. I'm not into that populism. It's not my case that petrol should be subsidized. This should certainly, ecologically and economically, this should not be the top priority of this country. But to say that BJP has done away with subsidy on petroleum, that's factually not true, sir. The fact is that Congress party, under Congress party regime, petrol prices were high in this country, largely because of not merely the profit that the companies were making, the margins that the companies had, but because of substantial taxation. And what has happened in the last 3 years is that taxation has gone up, largely in the case of central government and small ways by the state governments as well. Now, not reducing that is not called reducing subsidies. No, that's not the case. It's basically, the fact is that while your government had that huge, that period where there was a boom, you actually used it to simply add to the coffers of the government. I don't mind that, but what did you do with it?
Right.
Any other government would have created a sovereign fund looking at the future. Any other government would have created an emergency fund to deal with rise in petroleum prices.
True.
So my accusation, to which I would like Mr. Chari to respond, is that you squandered national resources.
Okay, you've squandered national resources is an allegation that Yogendra Yadav seems to be making, and I will go to Mr. Chari in just one more minute. I think I will also get R. Jagannathan and Jaggi. I want you to also talk about why investment hasn't picked up. Sadanand says it's the morality picture that got into play, a tax department that's so leaky was overpowered, over-empowered. Yogendra Yadav makes this broad point about how the wider picture is not rosy, and investors don't just care about stock price movement, they also care about that. What is your reason? Why do you believe big investment is not breaking ground? Is it on account of the twin balance sheet problem? Is there a deeper cause?
Yeah, see, I mean, I can agree partly because this is not the result of one single factor. Certainly there is a problem in all the fronts, including what Sadanand mentioned. But I think one thing we are not mentioning is when you take an attack on crony capitalism, you are going to see a fall in investment for a simple reason. What used to happen? It's not like we've never had these kind of problems before. Banks have had huge NPA pileups even 10-15 years ago, and companies. What used to happen was that companies used to use the Mauritius route to recycle money and recycle money from Dao, and a lot of Hawala money used to come in whenever, say, local promoters got in trouble. Today, the avenues for money to come into Sikh businesses has come down because of the fact that you are blocking these funds. Now, if you're going to ask promoters that you better bring in the money or you're going to lose it at the IBC, I think everybody has to now have skin in the game. Earlier, promoters had no skin in the game. Today, they are forced to bring in money in order to run their enterprises. I think when you ask that, then people obviously are not going to rush and start new enterprises, start investing, because their own money has to come in. Earlier, you could just over-invoice, global plate thing, get bank money, make it sick, and you didn't have to put in any money. Today, you have to put in your money. And that is actually slowing investment, because when you put your own money in, you're not going to be in a rush to invest. I think we are losing sight of this important thing, that crony capitalism has substantially come down, and that is going to slow investment in the foreseeable future till it becomes a new normal.
That's an important and an interesting point there, and which is why I think let's get all the points on the table before I go across to Mr. Chari. And Mohammad Khan, I know you will attack the government for vitiating sentiment, and which is why investments haven't picked up. But it also seems that the way of doing business in India has changed. The debt contract has changed. A defaulting promoter can no longer treat bank debt as his equity, can no longer treat it at will. The crony capitalism has come down, the kind that we saw in your government. The NPA mess, for instance, was something that the NDA inherited from you. So, in a nutshell, is this on account of the fact that the way of doing business, the rules of the game have changed here in India? Mohammed Khan.
No, I respectfully disagree. First, for the simple reason that you classify an NPA based on inability to pay the loan either between 90 to 180 days. You could have faulted the UPA as a legacy issue if there were defaults in the year 2014-15. After that, from that point of time onwards, if businesses are failing on your watch, then you have to take responsibility for the same. We didn't create the conditions over these last 3 years. Let's forget the first year. We didn't create or contribute to the conditions over these last 3 years, why businesses are unable to pay their debts or why businesses are unable to function in India. You can't simply say, as Mr. Jagannathan succinctly put it, that money was being routed in X, Y and Z route. For every dishonest businessman, there are 80 other businessmen who are trying to work within the system and honestly. So, a $1 trillion economy was not created overnight as a result of money flowing around in Hawala markets. So, that is being uncharitable to people who have actually contributed to the economy of the country. Number two, very, very quickly, Mr. Dhume, I want to give you a very specific example. Do you know in the year 2017, 2 years ago, they amended the Finance Act to allow any assessing officer to raid your premises. Earlier, you could question this in a court of law. They have excluded the jurisdiction of courts, which means that anyone can raid your house without any proof and they never have to explain themselves to anybody. Number three, very, very quickly, because we were on petrol. Sir, I have a simple question to ask you. By your own estimates, you have accrued 10 lakh crores. Mr. Yogendra Yadav said you should have used this money or explained to us how you plan on using this money. Mr. Jaitley gave a statement that this money is being collected to create a buffer. By God, you were blessed at $50, $40 a barrel in 2014. Mr. Modi said that meri khushnasibi desh ki khushnasibi hai. He hailed himself as an agency of good fortune. Now when the nation is in times of crisis and you've collected 10 lakh crores and no explanation is forthcoming from you or your colleagues as to how this money is being spent, of course we will ask you and hold you to account.
No, okay. Okay, Mohammed Khan, that point has been made, but I will also ask Mr. Chari to now respond to. One second now, I'm going to go across to Mr. Chari because he has to respond to everything that has been said. And Mr. Chari, one thing is that you've squandered national resources by not doing enough on oil when the going was good. That's one point, and you may want to respond to the point that Yogendra Yadav and both Mohammed Khan are making. But the other point is, why have you got it so wrong on investments? It's all right to say that the way of doing business in India has changed, but are you also presiding over the death of Indian industry? Because your laws are very good. It's very important to have an IBC. But the way it's been executed, how stringent it is, many people believe is going to kill the entrepreneurial spirits of our businessmen. It's actually going to kill the risk-taking appetite of Indian industry. So are you willing to, and have you presided over the death of Indian industry also in many ways?
No, I completely disagree with you as far as the industry sector is concerned. I don't think this government has done anything that will result in deindustrialization or death of industry. In fact, from 2006 to 2013, there has not been a single big ticket investment in this country. The manufacturing sector has lost out. Manufacturing goods import was minus 32%. In fact, it has gone down to that extent. There was no big industrial venture that was started in this country in the last 8 years till 2013. Therefore, the most important factor that has to be brought in was the question of make in India and transfer of technology. Many of the foreign investors were prepared to put money in this country but not give the technology. Modi government stood steadfast against it and said, no, nothing doing. If you give us technology, we are prepared to deal with you. And that is why companies like Apple and Rafael and many other companies, even the Israeli companies, are now coming into it. Defense production has been opened up, and in this sector there will be a PPP model where more industries are coming up and more areas are being allocated for specific defense industry production. And these things will ultimately have a greater effect not only on production but also on increased in industrial goods. And industrial goods companies which have been dealing with these specific things have themselves suggested
that electronic, electrical, mechanical, general engineering product, construction material and trading. These are the sectors, including automobile. These are the sectors where not only investment has gone up, but also employment has gone up. Therefore, it is absolutely wrong and malicious to say that this government is not working for industrial development. This government has done the maximum as far as industrial development is concerned, and investment avenues have been opened up. Yes, it was very rightly pointed out that the entry of black money into the business sector has been totally curbed, and this is nothing to do with tax terror, but in fact it is tax compliance, and there was no tax compliance. And if you don't like the word tax compliance, I think it is better not to do business rather than indulge in corruption and getting a political system which works not for the people but for these people. And whatever allocations that have been made for the agriculture sector in the last 15 years, the kind of agriculture sector allocation that has been done has never been done. It was not a populist budget that was presented last year. Last year could have been the most populist budget, but it was, the government did not resort to populism, and that factor.
Mr. Chari, I get your point. I get your point, sir.
Convince us that this government is not interested in populism as such.
Okay, you're not interested in populism, and that's good news for India. Let me just say that once and for all. But I think as far as agriculture is concerned, I will pick Yogendra Yadav's brains. But before I go across to him, I'm going to go to Jaggi. And Jaggi, very quickly, wanted to touch upon jobs. Is that the big red on the government report card? Or do you buy this EPFO payroll data that suggests that 6.13 lakh jobs were created in March alone? I mean, look at the kind of data and the statistics on jobs. It has left me baffling because I frankly don't know what the formal official figures are.
See, I think the government has not created enough jobs during the 4 years that's been in power. We should not rubbish the EPFO data. What it represents is increasing formalization of probably informal jobs, and to the extent that it is giving a social security net for millions of new people who earlier were denied it, but they probably got higher income in hand. That is a good thing. So, and it is good that we are sharing the data. The real problem with jobs is that Indian industry is increasingly becoming capital intensive, and it is continued to be so, and the failure of two key sectors which create jobs, especially in the last 2 years, especially we are talking about real estate where black money has been a constraint, and construction where I think only the government is investing in infrastructure and road building and other things and rural roads. So that is taking place very slowly, and I think a lot of private sector people who had contracts in highways and all failed. Now Nitin Gadkari had to rejig the whole thing to make it a TOT and all those stuff. So you're going to see a resumption of that now. I think the simple thing is this: India needs about 8 to 10 million jobs a year to absorb the increases in labor entry into the labor force. We are probably creating 5 to 6 million jobs, which is about 0.2% employment elasticity. At 7% growth in the economy, we are creating 5 to 6 million jobs. There is a gap of about 2 to 3 million jobs in terms of what we need to create. That only labor law changes and ease of doing business is going to do, and that's what we need to look forward to. So this has been a failure, but hopefully it's being corrected. As you see in the last two budgets, we have allowed fixed term contracts and labor flexibility. That's happening. Hopefully it will deliver in the next 1 or 2 years.
Right. No, we need that to be corrected because India cannot afford no jobs. But let me take this across to Yogendra Yadav, and I think this is one of the government's Achilles heel, if I may. Talking about farmers, Mr. Yadav, the government has perhaps dealt a bad hand with 2 successive droughts. There's no denying that. But beyond the rhetoric, and I know you're not a big fan of the government on this, do you see, do you see an attempt to fulfill that vision to double farm income and to make agriculture a viable profession? Because this can't just be rhetoric. This is where most of our population works, and they are living in absolute misery because agrarian crisis is far from over.
Supriya, I don't even see the political will to begin to do some of the things this government claims to do on farmers. On the question of farmers, I'm constrained to say that this is not where their heart is. They really are, they want to keep a certain pretense of doing things, but I don't see anything serious. You spoke about doubling of farmers' income. You know how many months it took for this government to even clarify what they meant by doubling of farmers' income, whether it was nominal doubling or doubling in real income. For months and months, this government could not even answer this elementary question. And on this panel, we can see how ridiculous this proposition is. I mean, they are just the sheer non-seriousness of some of the things they have done on agriculture. What does the agriculture balance sheet show? Yes, 2 droughts, but droughts have happened in the past. I would say not only 2 droughts, but 2 of the badly dealt with droughts. I've been in Supreme Court petition on this question, so I know what I'm talking about. One of the worst dealt droughts in the country. Second, on farmers' income. Now the Chief Economic Advisor of the Government of India concedes that in the first 4 years, the farmers' income has remained stagnant. 3, there is a crisis coming from climate change. What is our preparedness? What have we done with the question of farmers' protection against natural disasters? The answer is Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana, touted again and again. You know what is the reality? The earlier schemes which were junked by this government used to cover 23% of Indian farmers, were considered rightly so to be bad schemes. The government's case brings in new scheme. The coverage goes up to 28%. The government says, oh, we are on to 50%. Next year it comes down to 24%. So the net gain of spending 3 or 4 times more than we used to spend is an additional coverage of 1%. I mean, this is the reality that we are talking about. And in the case of minimum support price, as all of you know, there was a sleight of hand in the declaration by Mr. Arun Jaitley. And even on that, and this is an open challenge to everyone sitting on this panel, let us go to any mandi of this country. Choose any one mandi of your choice. Choose any one crop other than wheat of your choice. And show me if farmers are getting MSP for even one crop in one mandi. This is the kind of situation we are dealing with. So what we euphemistically call a rural distress is actually an agrarian crisis which is unaddressed.
Okay, let me just move this debate beyond the economy part of it. And Sadanand, I will begin this round with you. Beyond the economy, let's talk about some fault lines that exist, from Gaurakshaks running havoc to MPs and ministers making blatantly communal statements. The government is often criticized for having polarized the narrative. This attack on what they call the idea of India, as it's being called by the Western press, how much of a concern is this, and do you believe it has hurt India's image abroad? Mr. Yadav made this mention earlier in the debate that, you know, when investors look at India, they don't just look at stock price movement or inflation and fiscal consolidation levels. They also look at newspaper headlines. They look at things beyond that, the wider picture. Do you believe things like these, the narrative which went unchecked, has hurt India's image?
Yeah, I'd step back a little bit. I mean, we're now at the 4-year mark, and I would say that, for the first couple of years, I don't think that that this narrative was, that prominent outside of India. I'd say particularly in the last year or so, after the appointment of Yogi Adityanath in Uttar Pradesh, I think that's the kind of turning point, and I think that's when people outside India became much more concerned about the path on which the country is headed in terms of interreligious sentiment and so on. Now, I think that in my own view, and you can find this in my writings, I think it was good to have some kind of serious conversation about the Nehruvian secular project. And I think that you could certainly make a case that there were aspects of that project that had gone off the rails and that required a corrective. However, what we're seeing right now, and this is what causes a lot of people concern, is not just a corrective, not a sense of correcting the things that were wrong or that were excessive about that project, but are tossing the whole thing into the dustbin. And the idea that this new, strident, extremely hostile to religious minorities rhetoric has gone mainstream and is blessed by the highest levels of government is certainly something that causes deep concern outside of India. as indeed within India.
Mr. Chari, I have known you for years now to be the voice of sanity. At the end of 4 years, will you concede that one of the biggest failures of the government has been to let these fringe voices, if I may, become mainstream, to let the hostility be so widespread, to let ministers and MPs get away by making these statements? Do you believe that has been a failure? Because whatever you may say, India voted Mr. Modi for development, and yet the narrative has been hijacked by these elements time and time again, and they've gone unchecked.
No, not at all, not at all. I think we are totally off the mark as far as these incidents are concerned. These incidents, no doubt, have created a sort of a bad image for the country, no doubt about it. But they were aberrations. They were not the normal. They were absolute aberrations. And in each and every case of these things, the culprits have been arrested. Some of them have been punished, and the cases are still going on. The local chief ministers of the particular states, the Prime Minister himself, the Home Minister, the party president, and everybody has condemned these acts of aberration. Therefore, to say that these have really caused some sort of a trickling effect or a great huge effect on our investment and our productivity and our economy and all is absolutely blowing the point beyond its necessary size. Therefore, I totally disagree with this point. Absolutely, these aberrations have to be controlled, no doubt about it, and many times these are all related to local law and order situation also, and the police force in those states have taken action, necessary action, and they have been told to be very strict as far as these things are concerned. And I think those who are responsible for reporting these incidents have also to also behave with a little sense of responsibility. Instead of creating greater wedge among societies and communities, it is better to put a stop to these incidents and also warn the culprits that they will not be tolerated when these things go up. Therefore, I totally disagree with this whole sentiment and viewpoint that the new narrative is emerging and all that. These are all aberrations. They do not have any legal sanctity, moral sanctity, or party or even ideological sanctity as far as these actions are concerned. So, having said this, I would also like to point out certain things about the agricultural budget that this government gave last year, and I think Mr. Yogendra Yadav should seriously reconsider what he has said. If he thinks that the last year's budget was a disservice to agriculture sector, I am prepared to engage with him on a totally different debate on this issue. But suffice to say that agriculture economy and rural economy has never got the kind of importance that it should have got in the last not just 10-15 years but 70 years. There has been no investment as far as research and development in agriculture is concerned. There has been no investment as far as linking of rivers is concerned. There has been no substantial investment in agriculture in any of the agriculture markets are concerned. Even storage facilities have not been created.
Right.
Now, who is going to create all these storage facilities? We talk about profligacy. We talk about economic profligacy that was performed in this country for the last so many years. But now there is a government which is determined to increase the strength of the farmers and increase the strength of the agriculture and improve the agriculture infrastructure. And that takes time. And if Yogendra Yadav is not
agriculture is a touchy subject.
Let him come out with a totally different proposal.
Okay. No. Mr. Chari, where you're wrong is, you may want to defend your government's position on agriculture, but where you're wrong is to say that nothing has happened in this country for agriculture and it's only happening under the Modi government for the last 4 years. That is also a fallacy that we don't want to promote on this show.
No, I'm not saying that. That is not my point. Please don't put words in my mouth.
Okay. But Okay,
it is not
all right.
that.
But
It is
Yogendra
not
Yadav,
that.
I don't
But
want
the
to take this discussion. All right, I get that point, sir. I don't want to take this discussion back to agriculture, but I want to keep the discussion to what we were talking about, which was this, you know, the Gaurakshak narrative, the communal sentiment, the blatantly communal statements being made by some MPs and MLAs and even chief ministers in the government. Mr. Seshadri Chaudhary believes these are aberrations. What would you say?
I heard Mr. Seshadri Chari very carefully, and I don't believe his motives. All I can say is something that Mirza Ghalib had said once, कि खुशी से मरना जाते गैरत बार होता. If only I could believe one word of what he said. What has this country witnessed in the last 4 years? What he called aberrations are lynching happening in public. These are not accidents. These are actively promoted by certain forces which are close to the ruling party. What does the Prime Minister say? I have no doubt that he may have been involved in planning some of these things. No, he probably was not. What should the Prime Minister do? Straight away say, this is wrong. Prime Minister has not once named an incident or a victim involved in any of these aberrations. What should he have done? Said, my government is responsible, because in many of these states this was his BJP government. So naming an incident, naming a victim, naming a person responsible, government, and concretely spelling out these are the 3 things we shall do so that it never happens again. What do we get instead? We get abstract philosophic statements that come 72 hours, predictably 72 hours after the incident, some broad reference, philosophic reference which media is very careful to pick up and present. But no, he never says this particular thing was wrong, it was shameful, it should not happen in India.
All right.
This is not what we have heard from our Prime Minister.
So
I would again say, खुशी से मरना जाते गैरत बार होता.
Yes. I'm extremely sorry.
All right, we are quoting Ghalib on the show now, but I think I have to move on very quickly from this.
Regard for you.
1 second, sir. I will come back to you.
I think
Jaggi, you know. Go ahead, Mr. Chari, make your point.
See, I have respect and regard for Yogendra ji. That is why I am saying it again. The Prime Minister has condemned it in the highest, strongest of the words, and he has taken action. All Home Minister has written to all the Chief Ministers and all the Home Ministers of states to take action against this. And if there have been 10 incidents or 12 incidents or 15 incidents.
Give me one example where the Prime Minister may have named the victim, named the incident, named the culprits.
All. The Prime Minister has condemned it in the strongest of the words, and all these culprits have been booked. You show me one incident where a culprit has not been booked.
All right. Okay. Mr. Chari and Mr. Yadav, I can't get you to agree on that subject, but I'm going to move on. And Mohammad Khan, this is really coming your way. Even as we critically evaluate Mr. Modi's tenure, his own personal popularity remains extremely high. In 4 years, the BJP has made significant inroads into state after state. Now, what are you going to ascribe this popularity to? You can't divorce the man away from the government.
No, of course not. But my simple answer to that would be, give it a year. In fact, CSDS, this question is very topical because there's been a survey published earlier today which has pointed to a sharp and falling pattern of Mr. Modi ji's popularity. He's been significantly getting less and less popular as more and more people realize that this brand of politics comes with an expiry date. Can't fool all of the people all of the time. But Supriya, I wanted to say something because I was skipped over the last turn. So I want to make 2 very quick points. One, what Mr. Dhoom is saying about developing a scientific temperament is so relevant and important for this government to hear. When our Prime Minister is questioned on climate change, and I reference climate change because Mr. Yogendra Yadav gave that example, was speaking about it in context. When questioned about climate change, our Prime Minister says, "Aap nahi, वातावरण नहीं बदला है, आप बदले हो." In response to school children, and anyone can go and view this clip. So this is a government which has a member of parliament who stood on the floor and said climate change mithya hai, it's a figment of our imaginations. We have a health minister, Harshvardhan, who goes in a science congress, ironically enough, and says Stephen Hawking told him there's a secret to the universe greater than E is equal to mc square found in the Vedas, which might well be true, but Mr. Stephen Hawking never said anything of that sort to Mr. Harshvardhan. You have a prime minister to win elections, talks about history, talks about Thimaiya Saab, Karyappa Saab, Bhagat Singh, and is wrong on every single count. Number two, second point very quickly I want to make is, one point I want to make to Mr. Chari. Mr. Chari, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, third time there's a pattern. When a cabinet minister goes to the funeral of a lyncher and bows his head in respect and drapes his coffin with the Tiranga, then you can't say your government doesn't endorse it. When 5 sitting cabinet ministers, 5 sitting members of parliament give these statements, you can't distance yourself from this. I'm sorry.
No. I've got the last 4 minutes on the show and I have to take this. Mohammed Khan, I've got the last 4-5 minutes on the show. I will have to take it across to everybody. But Sadanand Dhume, if I may come to you, and there is this huge opposition that's coming together. And Jaggi, I'd also like to pick your brains on this. The whole opposition coming together to take on Modi and Shah. Arithmetically, it's a formidable force on paper. But realistically, can it stop the Modi juggernaut is the big question. And Jaggi, let me begin with you and then I go to Sadanand on this.
Yeah, in some states this opposition unity is relevant. Like for example, in UP it could make a difference. It could make potentially a difference in say Karnataka, where you've seen 2 parties coming together to keep the BJP out, and arithmetically at least their numbers look better. So, but it could also make a difference maybe in a place like Maharashtra if the BJP and Sena don't kiss and make up. But in the vast majority of states, either it is the Congress versus the BJP, or the BJP is emerging as the single largest party or opposition in places like say West Bengal, or where I think even the CPM is declining, and in Tripura you've seen. So even in Assam, for example, there are there is an alliance that could dethrone the BJP. So I think it will work in 5 or 6 states, but it will not work in all states. So I think certainly BJP should worry. It should worry where it will get new allies from. If it does not, I think it has a problem in 2019.
All right, it has a problem of allies, but I think before I go across, I think I should ask Mohammed Khan this question, because Congress wants to be the fulcrum of this grand anti-Modi alliance, and I was having a conversation with some of your leaders, and even the Congress believes that they cannot be this homogeneous anti-Modi bloc. There is no common ideology. What will hold them together? The survival, the test of longevity, the test of egos is all this alliance will be pushed through. And over the long term, a lot of political scientists out there say it may not be the best thing, because you may actually cede ground even more to the BJP by all kinds of forces coming together. Mohammed Khan?
Right. So, yeah, Supriya, we are faced with the challenge at this point. We have 2 options when we face this challenge. One is we put our personal political ambitions at the forefront and forget what these people are doing to our country, or we say that the bigger challenge right now is to stop this divisive anti-constitutional force that is so mired in opacity that it doesn't even release its prime minister's degrees. It is a government mired in the fact that if you look them in the eye and talk to them, they will bring down the might of the state against you. So ultimately, this is a challenge, and all the opposition parties are united in this one regard, that we believe in an idea of an inclusive India. And it may sound very schmaltzy to you and your viewers, but it's the truth. One by one, steadily, these people are picking up the fabric of our country. One minister of theirs actually says we are here to change the constitution of our country. Ravi Shankar Prasad comes into office and says, floats a proposal to drop the word secular and socialist from our preamble. So again, it's not a long stretch to say that these people are against the very idea of India, in our opinion, and we will stand together if we must to take them down.
Okay, let me just quickly take this across to the last words on this show. And Sadan, I'm coming to you. 12 months to go before big elections in 2019. Where do you see the Prime Minister investing his political capital?
Well, first of all, I'd like to sort of just a few quick points. One, I think it's clear that Modi is still the most popular politician in India today. There is no question about that, and election after election bears this out. Second, I think it is true that the opposition seems to be getting its act together. And if you just look at, Jaggi's analysis about, a few states, if you just take those 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, and Maharashtra, off the top of my head, I think that they contributed about 120 odd seats out of the 282 seats that the BJP won, maybe a few less here and there. So, the fact that if the opposition is able to get its act together in some of these states, because some states did disproportionately contribute to the BJP's 282, then they would be in trouble. However, I do not see that as a done deal. I think the opposition, as you pointed out, does not have any great, ideological affinity or unity. And in fact, have
I think I'm losing Sadanand's audio there. But a quick last word to Mr. Seshadri Chari, since he represents the government and the party here. Where do we expect your government and your party, sir, to be investing its political capital in the last 1 year in office?
No, I don't represent the government. Yes, of course, I represent the party. But I think as far as the points that were made by you about Modi's popularity is concerned, yes, I do agree it is going up, no doubt about it. And as far as opposition unity is concerned, it's quite a unity forced by circumstances, and it has no principles, it has no ideology, it has no agenda, it has no new narrative, and it has no new program also. And even then, these people can come together, but I think the Congress as a grand old 150-year-old party is making a single largest mistake of taking the crutches of smaller parties who all of them have done business with both Congress and the BJP at some time or the other. So if the Congress thinks it is going to lead the coalition of opposition parties, it's absolutely wrong on its part to think so. It is not going to do it. The Congress or this opposition coalition is not going to really make any dent as far as Modi's popularity or getting 300 plus seats are concerned. If the Congress is able to manage a few more seats in Parliament, it should thank itself. But beyond that, I don't see opposition unity. I don't call it unity in the first place, but merely coming together of these opposition parties and creating an arithmetic is not going to dent BJP's popularity or Modi's popularity or the number of seats that the BJP will get.
Okay. All right. On that note, I've completely run out of time on this edition of the India Development Debate. Can't thank this wonderful panel enough for the enriching discussion and for the points that have been put forward in this debate. Starting with Yogendra Yadav, Sadanand Dume, R. Jagannathan, Mr. Seshadri Chari and Mohammad Khan. Thank you very much for sparing time and being with us. As we assess the 4-year report card of the Modi government, there are hits, but there are also many, many misses. He came on the back of big promises. Some of them perhaps were irrational and he couldn't have perhaps kept them. But the reality is that a lot was expected of Mr. Modi because he represents the first full majority government in the last 30 years, a 282 that was perhaps not put to abundant use. Of course, the politics of this will be decided in 2019, but there is enough that needs to be done and has been done on the economy, some game-changing reforms like the GST and the IBC, but much more needs to be done to put that virtuous cycle of private investment back in motion, because that alone will ensure jobs, that alone will ensure robust economic activity. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.